right, well, let's just get started. So yeah, welcome along to our panel discussion on applying the waste hierarchy to organics. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors who we couldn't have made this event free for everyone if it wasn't for them. So we have Auckland Council, and on the panel today we've got Georgina, who is representing Auckland Council. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you Auckland Council for your support. We've also got Rothbury Insurance and Envision Consulting and Waste Not Consulting. So we'll put some more information about these guys in the chat if you wanted to check out what they do. And we've also got some other supporters. We've got the Zero Waste International Alliance, and we will be having a panel discussion tomorrow morning at 8 AM with some of the guys from there, and also the Global Alliance for Incineration Alternatives, also known as Gaia. Yeah, thanks for your support, and we will be releasing one of their panel discussions on Sunday that they recorded a few weeks back. All right, well, thank you so much for all being here, and I'm going to hand over to Daughter, who is going to introduce Andrew.
Yeah, so Andrew is part of the Zero Waste Network board. So I love my board dearly, and I think they're all amazing people. But one of the things about being on the board is you get dragged into doing jobs like this. So Andrew has very kindly volunteered to take part and be the moderator for this session. He has heaps of experience in the kind of waste and sustainability with roles in the Ministry for the Environment, at local council, also as a consultant, and recently running a community recycling sector. So there's a really broad range of experience that Andrew has, and he has been involved particularly with composting in terms of procuring composting services for council. So I think he comes with a good base knowledge, and I'm really happy that he is taking over the session. So he'll lead you through what's happening today. Thanks.
Cool, thanks. Okay, so the structure of this really is we'll go through the panel members. Each panel member, I'll introduce them, and then they've got a presentation, and then we'll get into some questions. I think the reason I stuck my hand up for this one is organics it's a really exciting space. You know, the opportunities for New Zealand in organics, and I think one thing that the whole panel will agree on is that there's exciting solutions there, and I'm going to stick my neck out and say that there's no place for organics in a landfill, you know. So we've probably got some consensus there, and we need to look at the alternatives and how we apply that waste hierarchy to it, you know. So we'll get straight into the discussion. So first of all, we've got Kate Walmsley from the Urban Farmers Alliance. So Kate is a Wellington local, community scale composter and regenerative agricultural advocate with a background in biotech, being part of KaiCycle for the last 5 years, and more recently the Urban Farmers Alliance has allowed her to gain a hands-on appreciation of how soil health is a nexus to so many environmental and social challenges we face today. Kate's a contributing member of the Urban Farmers Alliance and was its initial national coordinator, and is a member of a newly formed Citizens 12.3 group, and is involved in several other food waste and local initiatives and projects. So looking forward to hearing from you, Kate.
Cool, thank you so much for the introduction, Andrew, and kia ora koutou. It's really wonderful to be here, and big thanks to Daughter and Izzy and the team for putting on this panel, as well as the amazing program and the rest of the summit. I'm just going to try and share my other screen to do my intro slides, which are quite hastily put together, so apologies for that. But yeah, I guess this is just about kind of where I've come from I'm from Wellington. I grew up in Karori. I've recently moved back here. I started studying biotechnology at Victoria University quite a few years ago now, and that was all very fascinating. And I do love biology, but I got quite fed up with working in the lab. I just was frustrated with how long it can take to feel like you're making a difference in that sector. Around the same time as I was finishing my postgrad, I started volunteering at KaiCycle, and I stuck my hand up to learn about composting and start to design a system for us to manage what we were collecting from the local area. Never could have anticipated how much there was to learn about composting. Really went down the rabbit hole there. It's so fascinating, and how, and wider soil health and plant health and the wider impacts of that on our environment and society. So that photo in the middle there, I used to go down and turn the compost once or twice a week for about 3 years, which was quite labor intensive. That's where we were a few years ago. We've come a really long way since then. And I've kind of done a bunch of education and outreach things and a few volunteering things, but being part of KaiCycle has been an amazing experience, and I've had the chance to meet a lot of incredible people through that. So many people have passed through this project. And then about 1.5 years ago, we started to become connected up with other groups around the country doing similar work to us in regenerative urban farming and composting. We got together and started to form the Urban Farmers Alliance, which has now kind of exploded quite a lot, and there's so much amazing communication and collaboration happening between these groups, which has really accelerated everyone's learning and motivation and efficiency. So it's had huge impacts for KaiCycle. It's in terms of our composting, we've really managed to start to develop a model that's highly scalable and improve our composting methods. And we are starting to scale out our network of small scale composting hubs, which is very exciting. Actually, we put together a presentation specifically on that, which is being released today as part of the summit, if anyone's interested. We have been modelling our urban farm at Hospital Road on the amazing intensive regenerative urban farm OMG Organic Market Garden in the middle of the Auckland CBD up in Auckland, which is a project for the Love of Bees. And that's helped us transform our urban farm from this 1.5 years ago, quite wild, into something that's really productive and we're really proud of. So we've come a very long way in the last few years, and we're looking forward to doing a lot more. I guess I just wanted to touch on more wide waste issues. A big kind of wake up call for me was when I went down to Fox River last winter to help with the landfill cleanup after the Fox River flooded and tore away half a historic landfill. That was really quite something to see firsthand, the impacts of the highly wasteful society we live in, and just the cleanup costs of this one disaster was just huge, and the ongoing impacts to the environment are enormous. And there are so many other landfills around our country at similar risk. So it's just a big wake up call that we need to start reassessing how we live, how our approach to waste, designing out waste in the first place, and checking back and readjusting how we relate to and treat our land and our ecosystems that we're dependent on. So we've also just recently completed a program on traditional resource management from a Makaurau Māori perspective, which has been a really amazing learning journey, and I'm looking forward to keeping on this learning journey. And this is just a short summary of what KaiCycle is about. And yeah, from picking up food waste locally, recycling into really good living compost, growing nutrient-dense food, which then goes back into our local community. So I hope to speak a little bit more to that soon, but that's definitely enough from me for now. So thank you. Very glad to be here.
Cool, thanks, Kate. So next we've got Jerry Gillespie, and Jerry is talking about returning organics to soil. So Jerry's been involved in the recovery of organic materials and their reuse for 30 years in Australia and overseas, including roles in New Zealand and consultancy work in Egypt, China, Scotland, India, Wales, France, Japan, Taiwan, Canada, and the US. So a real international perspective there. So with emphasis on the community engagement, he developed a city to soil collection program and helped refine an inoculant-based odor-free, no-turn compost process based on the work of Emmy Bruce and Sir Albert Howard. His current projects are in the fields of biochar, foliar fertilizers, feral animals, food waste and compost, and he works as an organics consultant to local businesses, farmers groups and councils. So over to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very lengthy, was it? I didn't think it was quite as long as that. I'll just share this screen. Let me know if that, does that come up okay?
Yeah, that's all good.
I just have to get rid of it. So the original, the thing that's always struck me about organic material is we should have started there rather than bottles and cans, 30, 40 in the 70s, etc. There was always much more opportunity in organic material, and indeed, if organic material is taken out of the waste stream, so if it's separated from the other materials, you immediately remove the total yuck factor. So you could really effectively, in 1994 in Guelph in Ontario, they started a wet dry collection system. And I would think if we're going to carry on with the stupidity of having compaction trucks collecting recyclables, then we're much better off to have a wet dry system than we are with the current mishmash where we get engineered solutions that supposedly give us good products at the end and in fact give us crap. As Andrew said, I developed a thing called the city to soil system. It was basically how do you engage an urban community, and I have nothing. In fact, I'm all in favour of the idea of people composting and growing their own food either at home or in community gardens, and we have quite a few of them around here. But the vast majority of people we found in the Canberra government in two individual surveys we found that around about sort of 64%, 65% of people said that they had compost piles in their backyard, and when you actually had a look at it, about 25% of those people had compost. The rest of them had basically an uncontrolled landfill. So I was really keen on the idea of engaging the public. So we told people the simple message that we need this stuff clean because it's going into soils to grow food. We found we never got above 0.5% contamination in the seed to soil program. But one of the things we did, as Andrew mentioned, we had to develop, because the councils we had in the $2 million project were hours and hours apart. One is a place called Condobolin, about 4.5 hours from here. We had to develop a different composting system, otherwise we would have been spending all of our time running up and down the highway and used all of our money just running machinery around. So the compost process is basically a mix of, as Andrew said, of Sir Albert Howard's 1930s process on pages 48, 49 of his book, The Agricultural Testament, and a woman called May Bruce who grew vegetables, who made compost and grew vegetables during the Second World War and Britain was under siege. It combines the two things of it's got a cover. The basic idea was if you have an upturned V like that in a compost pile, as soon as you get to respiration, when the moisture goes out, if it's just a straight V plastic cover, all the liquid will run off. So we put a dip in the top, which means that the water reticulates back into the pile. It has a higher moisture level generally than most other compost processes. Sorry about that. It has a higher moisture level. It doesn't require shredding, doesn't require turning, doesn't produce any odor, and you don't have any gaseous losses to the atmosphere. I can describe that a bit further, or people go to my website, jerrygillespie.net. You can actually see all the details there. The other thing I'd like to mention in terms of organics that I think we've totally missed out on is the notion of a product called hydrolysate. For those of you who are fairly deeply involved in biostimulants, and you've got a group there now in New Zealand called Quorum Sense, I think that's going to radically change everything we're doing with organics. We've got processes now that using simple composts and biostimulants will be able to totally eliminate the need for chemical fertilizer, I believe, in the very short term. Hydrolysate is very interesting because it takes any sort of protein source, breaks it back with a very, very simple inoculant, similar to the one that's used in the compost process, and turns it into, breaks it back, it breaks all the proteins in that material back to amino acids and peptides. So it gives you a means of organic nitrogen that you can apply to soils and farms and broader acre application. I think in sense of that, we were, pardon me, most of our research has been on pigs, feral pigs in Australia, but one of the really big opportunities that you have in New Zealand is to start converting all those Australian bush-tailed possums into fertiliser for local farmers. A huge market, and imagine the joy you could get out of putting it back into 1,000 litre IBCs and exporting those possums back to Australia. But anyway, that's sufficient for me. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Jerry. So I'm going to introduce Andrew next. A nice segue there, Andrew, from when are we going to start seeing you composting some possums for us? So Andrew is a real New Zealand food waste champion. So he's leading development at scale for food waste reuse and recovery solutions, and has received several awards over the years, from the Green Ribbon Award from MFE, an award from Auckland University for Entrepreneurs Joint Challenge, and Sustainable SBN Network for Going Circular runner-up and Sustainability Superstar winner. So some good awards there, Andrew. He's the founding member of New Zealand Food Waste Champions and is involved in government policy work, bringing some real-time solutions as the founder of EcoStock, based in Wiri, which recovers food for feed and looks at 35,000 tonnes per annum of stock feed, so some 10 buses a day, so some big figures there. Worms Are Us, New Zealand's largest commercial grower and farmer of composting worms, supporting operations in the North and South Island, and he's currently building the first large-scale food waste and biomass anaerobic digester in Aotearoa. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. I will bring the screen up and just share my screen and go into this here, which is, am I up there?
Not
Have you got
yet.
that? Not yet. Sorry, guys. Share. Okay. Does that come up yet?
Not at the minute. I think Izzy may be able to provide some comment.
Hold on, I'll see if I can do it from here. Oh, there we go. It's coming up. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I was quickly brief through it. I'm here firstly on behalf of the New Zealand Food Loss and Waste Champions, which is a group of 12 of us at the moment, which is I guess active in representing and trying to get New Zealand on path with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 12.3, which I think is a generic across all the hierarchical achievements, really trying to approach New Zealand's efforts, but benchmarking against the globe. It's down the bottom left-hand corner there, 12.3. Australia's got a food waste champions as well. The big thing about the group is that we cover a big network of people. We've got research, university, farming organisations, supermarkets, wasteman organisations, food rescue, food charities, food programs, and then you've got commercial scale operations like myself. Organics is a big sector, and it needs a lot of solutions and a lot of teams working together and actively supporting each other. And that's the first thing here today as far as the New Zealand champions. There's 12 of us there, and we are really open to working and bringing ideas to government and shining light on the many solutions we need in this space. For me, I've also got a business called EcoStock. I've got 35 staff. We move, it's about 10 bus loads a day of food waste. We've been going 14 years. We're a big organisation, but it's all about people as well, engaging with people. It's very important that the success of my business and the efforts don't rely on just one person, and there's a team. And I just want to put forward that for me, it's my people and the team around me that helps achieve some of these outcomes. Products, we are, I guess, a real world solution. We're not so much inventors, we're innovators. I go to Europe pretty much every year and work globally with about another 100 odd companies in this space. I've got 3 big commercial worm farms, a composting operation. I've got a food to feed business, taking food back to animal feed. And I've also starting a food that's not suitable, banana skins, etc., from curbside food waste through to AD, anaerobic digestion. So I guess in front of me, we've got about 6 solutions at a commercial scale. We help with community composting, with provision of worms, and working with farmers, growers, manufacturers. But we're doing it, and we also experience the real world problems around logistics, policies, consenting, but we are doing it, which is quite valuable for our experience. And in doing it, there's all, as Kate pointed out before, you've got all the jobs. You've got to actually do the hard graft and share those experiences, because there's barriers to doing things and sustaining things. But I understand the process and the circularity of achieving outcomes. And outcomes, given organics and the hierarchy, is seeking, because zero waste needs a zillion solutions, but solutions need processes as well, and putting it in sustainable format. The last thing here is that our journey's begun on the last leg, which is around the anaerobic digestion, and that's food to fuel, and the replacement of synthetic fertilizers and fuels that are brought into New Zealand, and taking models that exist commercially and sustainably, both in North America and in Europe, to bring another element to the organics solution base. Thank you very much.
Cool, thanks, Andrew. Okay, so last but not least, we've got Georgina from Auckland Council. So Georgina and her team at Auckland Council lead the design and delivery of community empowerment and behaviour change approaches to zero waste. So Georgina's background is in education and community development. Having worked in Aotearoa and internationally, her experience includes lecturing in social psychology and environmental protection, managing and mentoring programs for children, whānau and family, with a family member in prison, as well as research, evaluation and program design for World Vision. She's passionate about creating a world where people and environment can thrive, and can be found most days in the garden discussing the meaning of life with her 6-year-old. So over to you, Georgina.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for the introduction and for inviting me on the panel today. It's a real privilege to be able to talk alongside people that have an amazing knowledge and experience in the sector. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me for a minute. Okay. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay. So I'm a senior community advisor in the Community Wastewise team at Auckland Council. And our team focuses really on community partnerships, working with community groups and organisations who are working towards zero waste. We also run zero waste programs, and we do public place engagements and zero waste education with people throughout Auckland. So I just thought I'd start with an overview of our vision as a council. So Tämaki Makaurau, Auckland aspires to be zero waste by 2040, taking care of people and the environment and turning waste into resources. So it's not enough for us just to be focusing on the environment. It's about taking people along with us on the journey as well. Organic waste is one of our priority waste streams. We have 3 priority streams, along with plastic waste and construction demolition waste. And organic waste is a priority because of its value and in terms of being a nutrient-rich resource, and also because of the sheer amount of it that we're finding in Auckland rubbish bins. So just a little bit about the context we have here in Auckland. I think the average Aucklander, on a whole, Auckland sent around 1.6 million tonnes of waste to landfill in 2016. That's about 1 tonne per Aucklander. And then looking at organic waste specifically, it made up around 19% of the total waste to landfill. So in the average Auckland rubbish bin, you've got 45% food waste, 10% green waste. And I know a lot of you will be familiar with this, but I'm just recapping to give an overview. So yeah, well over half the Auckland rubbish bin with organic waste. So it's a significant problem. And also half of that 45% is avoidable food waste. So waste that could have been eaten, had people maybe stored it properly or planned their meals better and so on. Just another little bit around our context, and I guess a little bit around the audience that we work with when we work as a community wastewise team. So we have a really culturally and ethnically diverse city, which is a real source of potential, I think, for us. We as a council, we deal with people, at all places in their zero waste journey, from really passionate people who are already living zero waste lifestyles, right through to people who still have overflowing rubbish bins and might struggle to get their rubbish bin to the curb each week, and every kind of shade of colour in between. We've got a fast growing city. A key feature of Auckland is that we're constantly, as a council, having to keep up with the fast growth. And we have a mandate as a council to meet both regional and local needs. And so it's important to kind of invest in local projects, but also we need to meet regional needs as well. Just very quickly, I can go into this in more depth in the talk. I just wanted to highlight that green waste is collected privately in Auckland at the moment. And so we're currently looking at ways that we can work with industry to better understand the effectiveness of the existing green waste collections. So that's something that we're working on. In terms of food waste, we have a hierarchy around prevention at the top, supporting redistribution through food rescue initiatives, encouraging home and community composting, and then the final one, collecting with a curbside food scrap service. So I've got a range of our approaches. So at the level of prevention, we're focusing on the Love Food Hate Waste program, encouraging people to buy what they need, eat what they buy, and store food properly. And we've also got around 30 community-led partnerships with organisations that are kind of punching high up the hierarchy in terms of food waste prevention. We support food rescue initiatives, and there is some amazing work happening in that space and being developed. We run the Compost Collective program, and again, we support community compost hubs throughout Auckland as well. And finally, we will be getting a curbside food scraps collection for urban Auckland, and that is due to be started in March 2023. So just sharing a little bit about our approach there. Finally, our key kaupapa and our team is community-led and council supported. So we partner with a range of amazing organisations, and there are even more out there doing fantastic work as well. I don't have time to kind of go into everyone here, but I just wanted to acknowledge the amazing work that's being done throughout Auckland and around the country in terms of food waste prevention, composting, community composting, home composting, and a range of great community initiatives. So yeah, that's enough from me for now, I think. Kia ora.
Okay, thanks, Georgina. So in a minute, we're going to get into some of the questions. I think, so what we've heard so far then is we've heard around the local engagement solutions, looking at soil and plant health and scalable network of local hubs, linking in other factors like resilient solutions, urban farming and bees. I think a standout comment for me so far from Jerry was around this opportunity's been there since the 70s, and my reflection in New Zealand is, you know, I think the organics for us, other than local composting, does seem to have been one of the last cabs off the rank. You know, yet from a greenhouse gas perspective, it's a big one. We've heard from Andrew around some big solutions and shining a light on the solution for organics in the larger scale, and it's reassuring to see that there's a network of champions, not just for one solution, but 6 or 7 options there that can be scaled up as well. And then we've heard around the applying an organics hierarchy and council supporting a community-led, council-supported approach and looking at the waste hierarchy and the role of council in that mix. I think when we get into the questions, we need to be thinking of organics as not just food waste. You know, there's a green waste element there in that mix as well, and how we look at that, noting that, you know, landfill gas is 50% methane, and worldwide 11% of all methane is from landfill globally and 4% in New Zealand. So it's a big issue and one that we're all trying to solve together. So we've got some set questions, and I just remind everyone we've got the chat function. If anyone's got any questions that they'd like to ask the panel, stick them in there and we'll read them out as we go. So what I'd like to do first, until we start getting some of them, we'll go with the prepared questions. So the first one we've got is really unpicking that wider context around issues for organic waste. So organic waste, it's not nicely contained. It seems to be a siloed issue, but it's a much part of a bigger story. So to the panel, what do you consider to be some of the wider context issues around organic waste, and what do you think we need to consider when we're thinking about organic waste? So this really is, in one sentence, wider contextual issues around how we're dealing with organic waste.
One sentence is pretty tricky, but if I may start.
I'm summing it down to one sentence. You can talk for as long as you like.
Okay. Is it kind of free for all? People just put their hand up?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Cool. I guess I just want to, what Georgina said about the waste hierarchy and focusing on preventing food waste in the first place. That's really where we need to be focusing our efforts. Our food system has such an enormous negative environmental impact across the whole supply chain, and the landfill emissions are really only a tiny portion of that negative environmental impact. A third of all, as the champions of 12.3 note, like a third of all food globally is wasted from farm to fork. And I think Georgina also mentioned that amount of avoidable food waste that is going into our landfill. It was about half of domestic food waste. So if we can focus on pushing up that waste hierarchy and reducing the amount of targeting waste prevention in the first place, we can have so much more of a bigger impact, not only in emissions, but soil degradation, food poverty, food insecurity, biodiversity, all these kind of wider ranging issues. Waste is such a siloed issue, but organic waste does touch into so many of these wider things. So I feel like, just focusing on diverting food waste from landfill is kind of like the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff here. We really need to be focusing on wider solutions. And I do get worried kind of about locking in those solutions that only focus on that tiny part of the problem. I guess I don't want to stop there for now.
One of the things that really strikes me about the conversation, just last week I released a book called The Waste Between Our Ears, and that that basically addresses the issue from the perspective of what Andrew Fisher's trying to do. Organic material, regardless of whether it's from, it never was and never will be a waste. It's a highly valuable product that we've never actually put the good sense into considering how best we might approach it. And that's what I meant before talking about hydrolysates. I'm working with people in Africa at the moment trying to make a foliar fertilizer out of manure, because if we can help these very small scale farmers, we totally change their input costs. And I think the ultimate direction that Andrew is going in is in many ways taking that material as a base and turning it into products that go directly into agriculture. You've got some of the most exciting farmers in New Zealand that I mentioned before, the Quorum Sense Group. They've been doing some extraordinary things. And I think there is a possibility, working with people like Andrew Fisher and Georgina's groups as well, and you, Kate, too, that the idea of actually totally eliminating the concept of organic material as a waste product and saying, well, how and where do we best apply this in a local and a regional and national sense to our soils to stop using chemical fertilizers?
Yeah, I pick up from where you're there, Jerry. It's I think from my context, it's about bringing solutions, but also we call it food waste, but it's when we don't value it any longer, we don't respect it. We aren't putting the value. It's a lot of effort. Land's been given up to grow something. There's been a sacrifice. There's been effort involved, but we just see it as a loss or a waste. I think we've got to look at refocusing our respect of it, and actually, at the same time as in respecting it and putting some value there, is come up with solutions, and in providing solutions, be prepared to work together. So have some overlapping solutions that cover things and get some real alternatives in place. And look, we're a democracy. Everyone likes choice, and by giving the market choice, are we going to have some solutions? People don't like being corralled into one option, and we are diverse. And putting those choices out there will achieve a zero platform. But people like choices.
I think if we build on that, there's a question from the audience from Peter Hinton to you, Georgina, asking if you can define precisely what zero waste means and how it reconciles to soil carbon, food security and other environmental concerns. So I think there's that one. And again, just responding to some of the questions we've got there around where you see council's role in zero waste and that hierarchy.
Absolutely. So I guess I want to first start by talking, what has been said. I think in terms of we can't just think about organic and food waste without thinking about things like food insecurity and the lack of access to nutritious food that a lot of families face. So I absolutely agree with that. And we also agree with what's been said around soil health, the importance of restoring the modi to the soil, and the greenhouse gas emissions. Out of all of the waste streams, we know that organics is the most damaging, and so it's when we talk about organic waste, it's also kind of a portal to talking about climate change prevention as well. So I guess I was asked the question was, what does zero waste mean to us? And I think for us at Auckland Council, it's about moving from a linear economy to a circular economy. So rather than throwing it away into landfill, we are producing resources out of the organic waste that we are producing. And if along the way, we can also be considering factors around food security, soil health, that's the work we're currently doing at the moment in supporting food hubs and supporting composting as well. And it is about working, and even though we're kind of really striving to move as far up that waste hierarchy as we possibly can, as Andrew mentioned, we have to also work to where people are at in their zero waste journey. So we need to provide options, and some people, you know, might not be able to prevent, or they might, you know, have certain challenges when it comes to waste prevention or composting. And so we need to provide other options as well. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think for me, when we look at the wider contextual issues around the food waste, I think back to being on the procurement panel at council when we first started looking at organics, and just trying to look at that whole of life value approach, you know, where you're taking things like availability for soil nutrients, carbon impacts of collecting it, the ease of home composting solutions versus the scalability of big solutions. And then just thinking about what Jerry said around, you know, this problem's been there since the 70s. I think if we wait for a perfect solution or a one size fits all, then we may wait another 30 years for something to happen in this space. So it's great to see a whole heap of different things happening. I don't think there's one easy one size fits all at the minute for organics. You know,
I'd agree with that. We do need a combination of these localized and centralized solutions, but I guess what I think we really need to be really focusing on is that all these efforts will support waste prevention and waste reduction over time. When you have bigger centralized solutions that require a lot of startup, you know, capital expenditure and high running costs, it takes a long time to turn a profit on that. And so we're seeing, you know, long-term contracts securing waste feedstock. And I am concerned that then creates a lock-in effect where it actually crowds out and pushes down other solutions that could come up in that meantime. When we're talking, you know, 20-year contracts, that is such a long time. Where do we actually want to be in 20, 50, 100 years in terms of these other pressing issues we faced, like soil loss, food insecurity, food poverty, chronic diet-related health issues, biodiversity loss, waterway pollution, of course, meeting our climate targets, and actually building community resilience and long-term employment and green jobs. So I think all these things need to be addressed together out of that waste silo, which is, of course, a challenge. But that's where I am a real strong advocate for localized community-led professionally managed composting solutions, because they are a multiple duty solution that work across so many of these pressing issues. Thanks.
okay.
Could I just say something on just what Kate just said then too? It is true that we should be chasing the idea of reduction wherever we can, but unless somebody's eating a completely processed Macca's type diet, if you're preparing food, we found when I was running the ACT, the Canberra government's worm farm in the early 90s, the average household produced 1 litre of food waste preparation material per person per day on average. So if a person's eating a healthy diet, they're going to be producing that anyway. So we quite obviously need solutions. Getting people to be more efficient with what they produce, etc., is probably a very obvious thing as well. But I think we do have to recognise that if people are going to eat well and eat a decent diet, then it's really important that we cope with and cater for whatever it is that they're actually going to be producing anyway. And there is no possibility of reducing that. I mean, we can only get it down so far before we hit a brick wall.
Okay. Anybody else want to have a final word on that before we move on to the next question?
I think New Zealand got to understand that we are an exporter to the world of food. So food manufacturing on the commercial scale is a big industry for New Zealand. So we have biosecurity. We also have a brand of high health, high standards of food. And yeah, I mean, it comes back to the fact that food is pretty much one of the elements and food unlocks so much water. A lot of food has 90-95% water in it, so it's a water recovery exercise as well. So we have, you know, water and food, probably along with energy and shelter, are our critical elements. Other recycling solutions like plastic, fibre, metal have store life, store value. So yeah, it's bringing those choices to the table.
Yep. Okay. I think one question that I guess comes to me is, when we start seeing the changes in people's diets and needs around that food, around movements towards veganism and whole food diets and things as well, we may well see a big change over the next 20 years in what people are eating and how they're eating and how they're getting that food, so there's a whole heap of issues there, isn't there, that we're going to have to be agile as an industry to solve future issues, but commit to solving some of the big issues that are on our doorstep right now. So the next question then is real simple one. So what do you see as the priorities for action in regards to organics within New Zealand? Go for it, Georgina.
Hey, kia ora. So I think we've already really touched on this, but I think definitely a multi-pronged approach is needed. So it's this kind of combination of trying to work as high up the waste hierarchy as we can, but we also need multiple interventions taking place at different levels of the hierarchy. So I think for us at council, that means a real focus on food waste prevention, continuing to develop and support the reuse and sharing systems. And there's some really great work happening in that space. And yeah, as Kate said, I think it's really important to continually be encouraging people to grow food locally, to utilize the space that they have at home to grow food and in the community, and to compost as well. And then we also need services and infrastructure that can be making an impact at scale as well. And I think it's really important to make it easy for people to do the right thing. In terms of behavioural change, we need to make it easy, and we need to disincentivize the wrong thing as well. And also gaining real influence in the commercial sector. From council's perspective, we are we have direct control over around 20% of the waste produced in the city. So it's actually about working with a range of people and partnerships across community, across the commercial sector, to look at how we can reduce waste as well.
From my side of the house, Andrew, I think whilst there is priorities there, I think we need to also recognise that in New Zealand, in the last 3 years, there's been significant steps forward. We've had the landfill levy, looks like it's moving. Councils are putting out food waste recovery curbside, community composting. I think we've got to recognise that in the last 3 years, this has been given some light, and a lot of work's been done. And I think it's continued to support the rollout of what councils are doing, and that's across New Zealand. I think the biggest priority is supporting some of the efforts already happening and keeping them going.
Well, thanks for that.
Also too, Andrew, could I say, I think the change of, or not the change of government, but the government you have in power in New Zealand at the moment is also fairly highly attuned to what's happening in agriculture. And I think that presents a real opportunity for New Zealand leadership. New Zealand's often led the world in lots of different little areas that get lost in history. But I think with the businesses that Andrew is building up and the potential direction you can go in terms of supporting agriculture, either at the home level or the broad acre level, it's all there on the plate while you've got governance of the type you've got in New Zealand at the moment.
Go for it, Kate.
Yeah, in terms of priorities, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this soon, but looking again at that organic waste hierarchy and making sure it's fit for purpose for our unique context here in Aotearoa, and having that, moving out of that waste silo and taking into account broader issues at hand that organics do have massive consequences into. And I think something that's also important is ensuring that we are investing in future-proofed and resilient solutions. We are entering, we're in a post-COVID era, and yeah, infrastructure ain't cheap. So what does happen if we kind of create this lock-in effect where we've got kind of expensive large infrastructure catering for, you know, large amounts of organic waste? What happens if that system, you know, runs into trouble? So that's another strength that I really see in the decentralized organic processing of organics, in terms of being able to withstand supply chain disruption, and yeah, being able to not be just resilient infrastructure, building resilience right into the community levels, from that community level up, in a broader way, and employing more people. And it would be great to see more research and innovation being encouraged at the localized in the localized composting space. These kind of often community-led initiatives are chronically struggling to get funding, and there's so much potential here. It's just where, yeah, it's not being resourced anywhere near kind of large scale solutions at present, which is a missed opportunity.
Okay, oh good. I finally figured out to work out some of the Q&A things here, so apologies if I've not asked your question so far, but I've caught up with the technology now. So we've got a question here that says the Rodale Institute said we're losing 36 billion tonnes of topsoil to the ocean annually. So this is probably not a survivable trend. It's caused by loss of carbon structure to soil, turning soil to dust. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizers are implicated in part of this process. So what, if anything, does anaerobic digestion do to reverse this trend of soil and carbon structure loss, given it extracts carbon from food waste, burns it for energy, and also creates digestate, which is rich in readily available nitrates? Does anyone want to have a go answering that one? I think Andrew, maybe you're the resident expert in that space.
I think that's fairly targeted at me. I think we actually need to start to get an idea of the scale of things, and Georgina talked to it before. You've got probably close to 300,000 tonne of food waste going to landfill in New Zealand. That's a lot of product, and it's a lot big solutions. You've got over 5 million tonne of fertiliser going onto paddocks in New Zealand. You know, these are only partial solutions and partial elements. I think people are talking in total this, total that. We've got to start, you know, looking at elements or little areas and how we work it. Fertiliser in New Zealand application has advanced significantly in the last 5-6 years, and even in the last 6 months with water quality management. And on my side of the house, I'm seeing with farmers, the digital mapping of farms, the nitrogen mapping. Look, there's always going to be 1 or 2 farmers on the outlier, which, you know, gain the media attention. There is also a lot of farmers doing a very good job. End of the day, farmers being growers, horticulturalists. We are a country now of 5 million. We need to be able to grow food. We are a country that needs export. So again, it comes back to solutions. Anaerobic digestion captures energy. It's there's science and opportunities out there in the innovation space that other countries are 15, 20 years ahead of us. It's a resource. It's a way of substituting synthetic fertilizer coming into New Zealand. It's also a way of reducing, you know, fossil fuels coming into New Zealand. It is an opportunity, and it is a way of tackling some of it at scale. You've got community and then you've got commercial solutions. So having all of them on the table is necessary, and I think you've got to champion them all. And people, I think, got to understand the scale of organics and the agricultural industry in New Zealand and Australia. You've got to have big solutions because we're a big country with a big population. It's nice to have some urban things, and I think we've got to champion them all.
Cool, thanks for that, Andrew. I think whilst we talk about these wider priorities, a big priority in New Zealand as a result of COVID is around jobs. So we've got a question from Bailey. They would love to hear from panelists about the potential for job creation and pathways arising from investment in decentralized organic waste management solutions. Go for it, Kate.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the great question. Was that Bailey? Yeah, so I think it's still early days, but the model that we've been developing and looking to scale at KaiCycle, as well as the work that other localized composters are doing across the country and also working to scale is really exciting in terms of the jobs it can create. I guess we've done a little bit of a look at Wellington, where a quarter of everything that goes into our landfill is organics, and a very large proportion of that, almost half, is kitchen food waste from residents. So we kind of did some looking at, okay, if we can run a decentralized composting program along with food waste prevention and reduction efforts, I won't spend too long talking into the numbers, but we figured out we could cater for Wellington's food waste with a 2.8 mil investment in the kind of infrastructure we're looking at. And then if you round that up to say 5 mil for accompanying infrastructure and training, that's pretty low cost, really speaking, and the kind of the outcomes you're getting as well in terms of job creation, creating this resource of compost, a lot of which will be retained locally to actually create new jobs in regenerative urban farming, and all the kind of environmental and social outcomes of that are less direct. So to manage that kind of system, you're looking at about 200 full-time compost managers around the city. Again, this is if you were to put all Wellington's organic waste into the system, but it kind of shows that it is, it's possible. Obviously, this will take a lot of investment and work to get there, but it's not too out of the box. And we'd love to see that happening in Wellington, if that could be kind of our answer to curbside organic waste.
Okay. So Andrew, in terms of, I guess your industry at scale, comments in terms of job creation?
I think you've got to be understanding that, landfill, there's about 134 of them in New Zealand. An average landfill maybe has 3 or 4 people. And so, if you take that cost and their operating costs, you've got to be mindful of what the alternative is and the choices. My business in Auckland, I employ 35 people, and it's a significant wage bill of over $2 million, and that's in real time. So I'm doing that right as we speak. Those people are being paid. They have families. Our Aotearoa site, again, will be similar. And we've also got 4 other sites. That's based on our, food and our engagement with farmers, big commerce. So we're looking at around about, over the next sort of 2 years, nearly another 100 jobs on existing businesses that are already employing between the 3 organisations, about 140 people. So it's 140 real jobs, and it's happening at the moment. And, their families are benefiting, and, bringing in new technologies as well. We've got, in the construction process at the moment, I think like 12 guys directly employed. So, there's a ability to, scale up, and it is matching that ability to support the countryside and commercial outcomes. But they're on the payroll now.
Jerry, in terms of, the international context, where would you see the job opportunities being?
I think probably the best example that I would have is the Australian one, where we spend $11 billion a year managing around about 70 million tonnes of waste. 60 to 70% of all the material we put into landfills, and this includes paper and cardboard, is organic. If you look at our agricultural base, we've got 244 million hectares under agriculture, I think the figure is. But on average, that soil has got less than 1% organic material in it. So it's an absolute no-brainer that we should be paying people like Andrew Fisher's people and locals money out of that $11 billion to actually divert that material back into agriculture. I don't regard the issue of organics. It's not a waste issue at all. It's an agricultural and food issue. Particularly the way Australia's been a lot more beaten up by the pandemic than New Zealand was. or is. I mean, both countries have had a fairly solid economic downturn. It's a wonderful opportunity to start taking some of that money from the waste industry, some of those bloody French companies and Australian companies that come and rip the money out of everybody's local community, put it back into local communities, invest it in local jobs. It just makes a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. And that works in every country. That's exactly the same. If you look at what Andrew is talking about with AD plants, we did a small trial, as you would have been told by the international people earlier in the day. The English and the Europeans have a lot of trouble with mad cow disease, with BSE regulations, the veterinary standards. They're using anaerobic digesters in Wales to cope with that. But they've been paying farmers to take that digestate, which is actually quite a good product. And they've got some very good research on that as well. So Andrew's quite right. It's a really big opportunity. But another thing you can do with that digestate is add even more value to it by turning it into a hydrolysate. So taking the residual protein that's in that mix and converting it into something that's actually usable to make an organic form of nitrogen. So it's opportunity upon opportunity, but it's going to require investment, and it's going to require government to actually write contracts that actually require a different outcome, rather than you can either put this in a hole in the ground there or a hole in the ground there. We want you to do this with the product. So it's going to really eventually come back to council people and government people dictating what should be in those contracts to get the final outcome.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. I see you want to say something there, Kate?
Yes, but I thought maybe that was a better segue into if Georgina wanted to speak to that. So maybe I could later.
Okay, so in terms of job creation, that is something that we do a lot in our team through our community-led contracts. So we have over 30 community-led contracts who are employing local people at the community level to do things like composting, to prevent food waste. So we see that as really important. As Andrew mentioned, the curbside service will create further jobs as well. But I agree with Kate that we do need to keep looking into how we can provide more jobs in the community composting space. And hopefully with the waste levy increasing in New Zealand, there will be, and the cost of disposal for the commercial sector increasing, that there'll be more opportunities arising around businesses being more motivated to pay people to dispose of their waste as well. So I think there are growing opportunities in that space, and we should continue to look at how we can work together to do that.
Okay, so I guess that leads in nicely, Georgina, to there's a question there around you've mentioned the waste levy, and obviously, a good healthy proportion of that comes back to Auckland being the biggest city and putting the most waste in the ground. So Tim has asked, are there multiple interventions being funded and supported in the same way as they sit in the waste hierarchy? And then he's elaborated a little bit there with looking at that in terms of a question around how much is being spent on AD. So let's start firstly with that question around, I guess, targeting the funding according to the waste hierarchy, and comments on that.
Sure. So in terms of the costs, I mean, it's when you look at the cost of providing a weekly service to the whole of urban Auckland, for example, and also the costs of building infrastructure around that is ultimately going to be more expensive than other areas. And so yes, there has been a large investment put into the curbside food scrap service, and that is because it provides access to such a large number of households and provides that impact at scale. We are putting a really significant amount into the other areas of the waste hierarchy. I don't have the exact number in my head of how much all our programs come to, but it definitely is a really large investment. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Brilliant. I think we'll probably get on to the big question here for the session was around the waste hierarchy. So we'd probably be prudent to spend a little bit more time on that one now. So the question to the panelists really is, do we need a new waste hierarchy for organics? So I guess it's, do we need it? And if so, how do you think we should apply that? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, we absolutely do. I think to me, it's crazy that composting is still put below the level of recycling in our current Waste Minimisation Act, 2008. It's very unclear how different methods of dealing with organic waste actually are ranked in the Act. And so we need some better clarity on what are actually the ideal and the best, the hierarchy of the best solutions for organic waste for our unique context. And yeah, so we need one that considers environmental and social impact across the food supply chain, prioritizes local solutions which create more jobs, promote waste reduction over time, and minimize transport emissions. It also needs to be able to serve a growing urban population and meet our needs to produce food as an exporter, but also just to feed our people and people who are going hungry at the moment or not getting what they need. So yeah, I don't think it's a case of dragging and dropping technology that's worked overseas. We need to really reassess what do we need here in Aotearoa. And I guess I wanted to loop back to the question from earlier about soil health and soil carbon and kind of the how composting and anaerobic digestion solutions affect that. So soil fertility and its long-term productivity, like this comes back to the soil organic matter content, and that carbon is the critical part of it. Composting is the best way of restoring and building soil carbon. We've lost masses over time, and the loss of soil organic matter is a big reason for the soil loss we experience, both here and around the world. And so if we want to be building back our soils and ensuring this real long-term fertility and productivity, it's really imperative to be building the carbon and the living health of our soils. And we need to be moving away from nitrogen heavy fertilizers in order to do that. And I note that RAP, which is a group in the UK, their advice for farmers looking to use digestate actually recommend no more than 50 to 60% digestate to be used in combination with synthetic fertilizer. So it doesn't seem to be necessarily a cut and dry kind of displacement of synthetic fertilizer, which has a huge green carbon price tag and impact on our waterways and long-term soil health. So really, composting has to be much higher up, a real priority in our organic waste hierarchy, under preventing the creation of waste in the first place, which Georgina's already talked to in detail.
Okay. So I mean, I guess the question I'd throw out there is the waste hierarchy and I guess changing composting or organics in the waste hierarchy only one part of the solution? Do you think there's other administrative or bureaucratic tools we could use as well to make judgments on where different organic solutions should fit? And I'll probably point this at you, Georgina, first.
Sure, yeah. I guess when I was thinking about the waste hierarchy, the question that came up for me is it really depends on the audience that you're kind of targeting it at. It can be used obviously, internally within zero waste networks to help us all better understand and get on the same page when it comes to where we see priorities and where we see things fitting. But as a council, I guess we are also public facing, and our role is to educate the public. And so it's important that whatever hierarchy we create is easily relatable to people's everyday lives and uses kind of plain language as well. So that is, I guess there's two things. There's, communicating among people that are already clued up on organic waste and, have that expertise. And then there's communicating with the public as well. So that's something to consider when looking at the waste hierarchy.
Okay. So anyone else got an opinion they want to share in this area?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Andrew. the hierarchy is, I guess, simplified organics, and it's a policy instrument, but there's also, I guess, the need for a commercial and market instrument in this space. When you're talking about liquids, and wheys and drink manufacturers, that's water. You've got citruses, you've got meats, you've got imported foods, you've got international airline food, you've got biosecurity. They decide the choice of where it goes to, and those things aren't put through in the assumptions. The qualification to handle some of these, the scale, the insurance. It does provide a policy instrument, but there needs to be a support of a market instrument as well. The ability to bring science to the table and bring more players to the table. At the moment, sort of, if you're not in that first top one there, it's not acceptable to put your hand up to be any of the other players. And it's not a small element of our life. It's a critical part. And I think it's probably turning it on its side and showing the market the options.
I tend to agree with that too, just based on what all three speakers, previous speakers have said. There is a real need for regulation. I think about 20 or 25 years ago, anybody who was sort of operating in this space just operated on the notion that people recycle on goodwill or guilt or whatever. But I mean, there needs to be something that underpins it, that makes people feel a lot more secure about it. I've always been pushing for the idea in this country that we should have a national program that all organic material should go back into agriculture with really strict specifications put on it as a liquid or a solid, or it should get back into soil. But I think it is really, really important that at a national and a local level that people are given legal protections to actually direct material in specific ways. And it really won't happen just by goodwill and really hard working in local areas. It needs to be underpinned by law.
Okay. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of other questions here which I'll try and squeeze in. So Hannah has raised, it came up earlier in the conversation around choice and a need for multiple solutions. So I guess it's relevant to the waste hierarchy one in terms of the question's really, how can councils support that range of choices for organic waste through contracting and procurement, so not just ad hoc funding of grants? So I'm looking at you.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute myself. So when I talk about the community contracts that we have, I'm not talking about grants. I'm talking about contracts that we've been running for quite some time, and are continuing to run. So I guess I just want to give reassurance from the Auckland perspective that even though the food scraps collection is coming into play, that we, are absolutely going to continue with that work and those contracts, and really just looking at more ways we can support community composting as well. So it is a growing space. I'm not going to make any huge commitments right here on the session, but I do want to acknowledge that, just clarify that they're not just grants for us, and it might differ depending on the council.
Okay, cool. I've got a question here which I'll send to you, Andrew. It's an anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure who that is. Is there a profitable market for AD digestate?
In New Zealand?
Yep.
Yes, there is, but there's also, as Kate's alluded to, we run a composting business as well. So we're actually providing both worm castings, compost and digestate solutions to a farmer. So again, it's about giving farmers choices. Geographically in New Zealand, we've got a lot of different soil types. So it relates back to what the soil type is, what the crop they're growing, and the ability for us with AD, and we're taking it from overseas as well, is where we can actually introduce other products to make a fertilizer for that farmer and the farmer's needs. Highly monitored, and this is the joy of being at scale, that we can bring in other technologies to monitor the internet and software systems, so we can compare ourselves to other research organisations overseas and keep ahead. So the short answer is there's a market for digestate, and there's a lot of farmers in New Zealand who have worked overseas where this has been working for some time.
Brilliant, thanks. So we've got a question from AJ whilst we're on the subject of money, which is, what level do you all believe the New Zealand waste levy should be at?
Who's going first?
Anyone, feel free to jump in.
What level is it at?
It's at $10 a ton at the minute.
Oh, should be 5 times that.
Any higher?
So I think the waste levy, if I'm correct, Jerry, to bring up to speed, is $10 at the moment. I think it lifts to about $25 next year. First of all, it goes wide to take in about 130 landfills, so class 1 and class 2. And then from there, it increases to $60 going forward. Look, it's the hierarchy, and Georgina sort of talked about it. There's other things that need to be in place as well. The levy going up is one of them, but the licensing and accreditation of systems and supporting the consenting process. We have a very difficult process in New Zealand to actually scale up. Even urban planning, allowing this things to be brought to market and scale, or at least within urban plans. So we are a long way off the rest of the world, but we also have renewable energy ahead of the rest of the world. So, yeah.
I think there was, in terms of a more internationally relevant waste levy, I think I'm remembering $140 per tonne being proposed as the better goal to work towards. So that's what I'd like to see, a much higher waste levy, and that can incentivize, that provides funding to support lots of diversion efforts, especially localized resource recovery efforts. So we'd love to see more of that waste levy revenue going into community scale composting.
It's interesting from that perspective too, Kate. A couple of years ago, Sydney hit $350 a tonne disposal of mixed waste to landfill. A huge percentage of that is levy. The really dangerous thing in New South Wales is that I think they collect something like $870 million a year. Only about probably more than 10%, probably 100 to 200 million of that finds its way back into recycling programs. So I think if you are going to push the levy up, hypothecation is really, really important. And certainly you've got to take money out for the administrative role of council and government. But if it is going to go higher, it needs to be directed back into that same industry so that you actually achieve what you want. Because otherwise, New South Wales government is just skimming all the time, just skimming millions of dollars off into internal revenue. And it just becomes another tax which people reject all the time and complain about.
I think we're quite lucky in New Zealand. The Waste Minimisation Act and the regulations were quite specific on how it could be collected and distributed, and from memory about 10%, for administration things, and then the rest goes back out. But I think you're quite right about targeting where it goes. I've always been a big believer that you target the biggest areas of where the money came from. So if 30% of the money's coming from C&D waste, from the paying to dispose of that, put that back into that. If so much is coming from organics, put it back into that one. So there's an argument for directing it where it needs to be to solve the problems from where it came from. We've got about 9 minutes left. I think there's another question really around, probably the most important one for me really, is what makes you excited to work in the waste sector with a focus on organics? We're all there because we're excited about something. So what is that? Anyone first, Georgina?
Yeah, I'll go first this time. So yeah, I really love working in the waste sector as a whole, because it's something that's really tangible and relatable to people, and it's a way when people reduce their waste, they can really understand their impact at an individual level, but then it can also be scaled up. In regards to organic specifically, I think, as it's kind of been mentioned throughout this panel, that the way we grow, buy, and eat has a real transformative potential to nourish both humans and the planet. And so from an educational perspective, it's a really, organic waste is a really great kind of portal to help us understand how, the health of our body, how our bodies relate to the land, and how our bodies also relate to the atmosphere and planet and the wider ecosystem. So that for me is a really kind of exciting space to be working in. And also, again, just thinking about food waste specifically, I think it's a connector, and it connects us to each other, and it also kind of enhances different cultural rituals and people's cultures as well. So yeah, feeling really excited and privileged to be working in this space.
Okay, Kate.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about the potential of organic waste, becoming the solution instead of the problem, based on how we treat it. Because there is just, as a big part of the solution and the multi-pronged solution that has been alluded to is this harnessing urban organic waste and actually using that as a resource to boost regenerative local urban food systems that can start to reduce the impact of our wider food system. And be doing multiple duty work to get us toward a circular low carbon economy where our communities are well and getting what they need. What's been exciting for us at KaiCycle is the community support we've received over the last 5 years. So we've got the great problem of not being able to meet demand for our service, which is a user pays subscription model. And so we're about to start to scale out to meet that demand. And it's really the support and backing of the community who want action on food waste to landfill that are driving this and enabling us to get off the ground running and enabling us to look towards a wider vision. So that's pretty amazing. And we're really excited to work with other groups around the country through the Urban Farmers Alliance to see how these models can be adopted and adapted in other areas and other contexts. So it's a really collaborative area. It's not for profit kaupapa, it's community-led action, and together these small practitioners can achieve really substantial things working together. But that does need to be resourced at the council level and supported by policy as well, and funding. And I think also I'm excited about the idea of getting past peak food waste. Once we actually start to make meaningful reductions and prevention of waste, this community scale organic waste management is scalable and adaptable. We can pathway people through to these jobs that are created in urban farming, and there's other local food systems that have been enabled through this creation of this local resource. So it's scalable up as well as down, which I think is important. So we're excited about a vision of urban farms and compost hubs being throughout our cities, and every person being within reasonable access of these infrastructure.
Brilliant. Okay, Andrew, what excites you about working in this space?
It's been a big transition from someone who was an engineer in the army for 14 years. Look, first of all, having been in East Timor, Middle East, and everything else, we're very privileged to be in the countries we're in. And what I enjoy is the challenges. Over the last 14 years, divert over 300,000 tonne from landfill and keep applying the engineering thing. The big thing is food is the common connector for all of us, and it's globally a common connector, food. Now being with 12, the food champions, 12.3, and seeing the multiple solutions, the progress being made even in the last 12 months, the national food rescue programs, seeing what's happening in the science laboratories and connecting them with overseas. This is not just New Zealand's problem. It's not just New Zealand that has some of these hurdles. It's elsewhere in the world, and being part of that global solution's exciting. And for me, the number of staff I've got involved and the volume, and the fact that we're actually allowing many commercial businesses in New Zealand to sustain and grow. And some companies will reduce their waste production by over 90%.
Okay, Jerry, what excites you about working in the organic space?
I think the last 2 years has probably been, for me, the most exciting of the lot. So I've run large compost operations. I ran very large scale worm farm for the Canberra government at one stage. But toward the end of last year, Biostimulants Conference was held in Barcelona, and I believe I was supposed to be there but missed it. It got something like 1,500 attendees, and the reason for that is biostimulants are becoming a very rapid, they're developing very rapidly all around the world at all sorts of different scales. That because of things like, as I said before, quorum sensing, and out of that, the auto-inducer capability where you can coat seeds with products from either compost, vermicompost, from foliar sprays, or from compost extracts, and get crops to grow basically without any sort of fertilizer or stimulant at all. That to me is very exciting, because it does finally make it a real agricultural issue and a soil issue. There was a fellow called Richard Tong, New Zealand, he lives in just on the outside of, yes, anyway.
He lives down the road from me in Devonport.
Does he? That's right, yeah. Devonport. And Richard used to make this introduction to the need for organic material in soils in New Zealand. He used to say that ships coming up from down south used to know when they had to turn left, because you could see the brown in the water. It was the topsoil flowing out of the Hauraki Gulf. There's obviously a need for it everywhere at all sorts of scales, but I think that's the thing that's most exciting, because we do now have the tools to actually achieve these things.
Brilliant. Yeah, Richard's definitely a pioneer of waste and a local hero here in Devonport, for sure. So I want to thank everyone for attending this session, sharing your insights with us all. I think for me, the take home things there is, I really like what you said, Andrew, around food as a common connector. You know, we're all excited in this space because of the potential of what we can do, and the take home thing for me, it really is summed up in one sentence. It's we need to stop talking about food waste and concentrating on the food resource opportunities. So thanks again, everybody, for joining this session. Thanks everyone for zooming in and attending and providing us with questions and listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew, for moderating the session, and thank you to all the panelists. That was awesome. And a big shout out to all of our sponsors as well. We have got some more events coming up later today. If you are based in Wellington, we've got networking drinks happening at the Sustainability Trust from 5 till 7. And just before that, we'll also have our AGM meeting. So you're welcome to go along to that. Otherwise, tomorrow we have got 2 more live sessions. We've got our international case studies and practical examples at 8 AM. So that's going to be with the team from Zero Waste International Alliance. And then later on, just after that one at 10 o'clock, there's another panel looking at zero waste culture. And then alongside that, there's the daily releases. So head to our website, our summit website, and check them out. Yeah, we won't have any live sessions over the weekend, but we will. Yeah, tomorrow will be our last live sessions. Awesome. Thank you all for joining. And yeah, this will be uploaded to the website as well if anyone missed the start or want to share it with someone. Cool. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ka kite.
Thank you.